Today is Victory Day in Russia, the 9th of May, the date on which every year Vladimir Putin stands in Red Square and reminds the world, and more importantly his own people, that Russia is a nation forged in sacrifice, tempered by war and incapable of defeat. Except this year something looked different. The parade was smaller, the military hardware on display was reduced, mobile internet across Moscow was cut, officially citing drone security concerns. And for a celebration that is supposed to project invincibility, the optics told a quietly different story. A country that has been fighting a war for over 4 years and can no longer fully afford the theater of strength it once took for granted. That tension between the image Russia wants to project and the reality it's actually living is what makes today genuinely interesting. Because on the same day as Putin was invoking the Soviet victory over Nazi Germany to rally support for his war in Ukraine, Trump announced a 3-day ceasefire, May 9th, 10th, and 11th. Both sides agreed. A prisoner exchange, 1,000 from each country, is included, and Trump, being Trump, described it as potentially the beginning of the end. Now, let's be rational about this. A 3-day ceasefire is not a peace deal. It isn't even a framework for a peace deal. Previous ceasefires, including one Ukraine announced unilaterally just days ago, collapsed almost immediately, with both sides accusing the other of continuing to fire. This one was already showing signs of strain within hours of being announced. That pattern is important to hold in your head before getting swept up in any optimism. What a ceasefire is, however, is a signal, and today's signal is worth examining carefully. Trump brokered this. He went directly to both leaders and, by his own account, both agreed readily. That word readily is doing a lot of work. Because if Putin agreed readily to a pause, even a symbolic one tied to his most important national holiday, it suggests he is not entirely unresponsive to American pressure. That's notable. For much of this conflict, the assumption in Western commentary has been that Putin is immovable, that he's playing a long game no one else can match, and that diplomatic engagement is largely performative. Today complicates that narrative slightly. At the same time, agreeing to 3 days of reduced fighting costs Putin very little. It gives him a clean victory day, it gives him a prisoner exchange he can present domestically as a win, and it keeps the Americans engaged in a process, which is exactly where Russia wants them, talking rather than arming Ukraine at scale. Zelensky's position is harder to read. He signed off on this, which is significant given Ukraine's public posture in recent months, but he was also careful to say that Ukraine expects Washington to hold Russia to its commitments. That framing matters. He's not celebrating, he's managing expectations and quietly putting the accountability on the Americans. If Russia breaks the ceasefire, which remains entirely possible, Ukraine wants that on record. So what do we actually have here? We have a war in its 5th year, with no territorial resolution in sight, entering a brief pause that was announced less than 24 hours before it was supposed to begin. We have a US president who is clearly motivated to claim a diplomatic win and who has enough relationship with Moscow to get them to the table, at least superficially. And we have a scaled-back Victory Day parade in a country's entire political identity is built around projecting military confidence. That last point deserves a moment. Victory Day is not just a holiday in Russia, it is the ideological bedrock of the Putin project. The idea that Russia is the nation that defeated fascism, that Russian suffering has a moral weight that justifies Russian power, that the West will never understand what Russia has endured, all of that flows through the 9th of May. When Putin speaks in Red Square, he is not giving a speech, he is performing a myth that has kept him in power for more than a quarter century. The fact that this year's performance was quieter, tighter, more defensive in its logistics is not nothing. It doesn't mean Russia is losing in any simple sense, but it does mean the costs of this war are visible enough domestically that even the most symbolic event of the Russian calendar has had to adapt to them.
Whether a 3-day ceasefire becomes anything more will depend on what happens in the days and weeks after it expires. If the guns stay quieter for longer than expected, if back-channel talks produce something concrete, then today might look in hindsight like a turning point. If it collapses the way the others did, it will be filed alongside every other failed pause as evidence that neither side is yet ready to accept the terms the other can live with. The rational position, then, is cautious, not cynical. There is a difference. The ceasefire is real, the agreement is real, and the fact that both men said yes to an American request in the same week Russia held a diminished Victory Day parade is at least worth noting. But the beginning of the end has been announced before, and the war kept going. We'll see what the 12th of May looks like.